Business leaders face uncertainty and volatility. Non-humans are entering the workplace. Memes control the stock market. And geopolitics is a business concern. Disruption isn't a future concept. It's here. I am Justin Brady, and using 7,000 predictions and 12 major workplace trends from SHRM, you and I will sit down with psychologists, CEOs, scientists, entrepreneurs, and analysts to make sense of it all. This show isn't about the future. It's about actions to take tomorrow. This is Tomorrowist. I'm Justin Brady, and in an increasingly distracting world, employee focus seems really rare. It seems fleeting. But is distraction of your team actually a leadership choice? Today, Zeynep Ton, MIT professor and co-founder of the Good Jobs Institute, joins us to discuss just that. Zeynep, thank you so much for coming on Tomorrowist.
Thank you for having me, Justin.
You have a lot of experience under your belt, not to mention MIT professor, which is really cool. Like for me, anytime I get an MIT professor, I'm kind of starstruck. But 24 companies from Fortune 100s to smaller companies. So your experience is pretty wide and applicable to pretty much any kind of leader in any kind of season. But that's the one I want to start with is distraction in organizations, enterprise or small. Leaders tend to think, and they tend to have the instinct that they need to fix those lower level employees. But is that actually correct?
Yeah, I mean, it's they need to fix the lower level employees. I think when they say they need to fix that, they're thinking about we need to fix the front lines and what's happening in the front lines. And when I look at, the companies that we have worked with, over 30 now, wide range of settings, but most, service, low wage, frontline settings, there are a lot of problems that affect the customer experience, right? At restaurants, it might be the food is cold, it doesn't come on time, it's not what you ordered. At a call center, it might be a long line that you're waiting. At a retail store, it might be empty shelves. So there are a bunch of problems that they're seeing. They're also seeing a lot of employee turnover, and these things are all oftentimes corrected. So they're aware that there's a problem that needs to be fixed. It's often not a person problem, but it's a system problem. And sometimes leaders might miss that it's a system problem. It's not just the person on the front line serving, but it's the system that they work in that's creating all sorts of bad experiences for customers and for their operations.
I think for a lot of leaders, they tend to assume that the distractions at work are like Facebook or social media or personal things. But what I hear you saying is that it's actually the system in which they work that is allowing for these distractions to happen or creating an environment in which these distractions exist. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know exactly, Justin, why you went to distractions, but I'll tell you what the problems I see are in the front lines, right? One is oftentimes in many settings, pay is so low, so people don't have control over their lives. They have multiple jobs, they can't sleep, they're constantly stressed out about whether they can put food on the table. And that's a distraction in some ways because they can't focus on the job and they constantly have attendance problems. And then the work itself is oftentimes cumbersome, tedious. There are so many meetings, so many tasks that for them makes no sense to do, but they're asked to do, and their time they feel is wasted, or they're not empowered to be able to make decisions for their customers or improve their process. So when I look at work where the problems are, yes, for some people who are on their desks, there might be distractions with social media, etc. But oftentimes I find the problem with either how people are paid, how their schedules are, or the work that they're asked to do every single day.
So basically more pay. I think if I'm listening, I listened to the TED Talk, by the way. I read the whole book, as you know. And I think one of the risks for people skimming through it and not fully grasping all the ideas is that maybe they get the idea that, well, if we just increase pay, right? If we just increase more pay, if we just boost that, then we're going to get all the good jobs results. It's that simple. We should just do that and move on. But you've actually had companies try that and it doesn't work. Why not?
You're exactly right. And if leaders think that what I'm saying is just raise pay and everything is going to be better for your business or for workers, they won't believe me because some of them might have raised pay before And it didn't do much to either the motivation of their employees, to turnover, or their performance. Pay alone doesn't do much, but the absence of sufficient pay guarantees that people can't focus on the job, and it guarantees that turnover will be high. So pay is like a hygiene factor. Its absence causes all sorts of problems. Its presence is not engagement, motivation, or high productivity. So pay is, when I talk about a good job system, pay is just a component, but an essential component of that good job system.
Yeah, and I'm glad you point that out because it's a whole system. Because you've had the pushback, and you talk about this in the book, where people are like, hey, we put the pay in, we like doubled it, and the result was we lost more money and nothing changed. And so it's a whole system that comes with it. Pay, of course, is a part of it. And I do imagine pay by itself maybe does help a little because if people are working two jobs, helping them work one job does increase focus at work. But to your point, it's a whole system. One of the biggest questions I have when I'm reading through this book is I'm imagining myself as an hourly employee and like a frontliner. And I remember things being so obvious to me. And reading this book, you're reiterating some of those things. But leaders, for whatever reason, just don't get it. They're not listening to the front lines. They're not listening to their workers. And is this because executives optimize for their own processes and they get lost? Is that what they're doing?
Yeah, I mean, there are some executives who manage things from up here and look at numbers and make their decisions based on numbers, and some executives who are completely disconnected from what's happening in the front lines. But I have also seen executives who understand the challenges that their workers are facing, understand that there's something wrong with the work, and they understand all the productivity and customer problems that come with it, but they feel like they're stuck. They're stuck in a system because they don't think that they can afford to invest in their people, or they don't think that they can afford to make system change because they think system change is risky. And one of the reasons that I wrote my book, The Case for Good Jobs, is to let them know, look, system change is not as risky as it looks. You don't have to change the whole system all at once. And status quo is more expensive than you may think.
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to address something here. You have mountains of data, mountains of examples, a long list of successful organizations. You don't have to answer it, but what's your completion rate for people going through the good job system and successfully? You have the data, it's very convincing, but I would be willing to guess there is some drop-off rate.
Oh, absolutely, there's drop-off rate. And I talk about it in my book, right? We have run workshops with companies, and their leaders at the end of it ended up not going forward with the good job strategy. They, for example, one of the I talked about it in one of the chapters. One of the companies we work with, a huge Fortune 100 company. They were so excited about the good job strategy. It all made sense for them in the workshop, right? And then when it came to executing it or implementing it, they said, okay, we need to make a bunch of different changes. And one of the changes that we need to make is pay. And we're focusing so much on pay. It's not just pay, but it's just an easy example.
Yeah.
And then they said, okay, we need to raise pay. Let's look at the data. Let's see what happens last time we raise pay. They looked at the data and they realized that the last time they raised pay, it didn't pay off. So they concluded we can't afford to do this. So this is doable. We have seen companies do it, but it's not all companies that work with us end up implementing the good job system.
And now you'd think, facing your previous examples and incredible standout successes and all the data that you have, people would just move forward with it and there wouldn't be this drop-off. But it's obviously not so obvious to these leaders. Do you have any methods you turn to hold a mirror up to them and say, look, you actually do need this, whether you think so or not? Do you have a strategy for that?
Yeah, I mean, we do in our workshops or in our structured problem-solving exercises with company leaders, we do hold up a mirror and we ask them to look at their own data, right? We ask them to compare how well they're satisfying their customers versus the best in their industry, or their productivity, or their employee turnover, or what percentage of their frontline employees, the full-time employees, are making a living wage. And when you hold this mirror, oftentimes they're not very happy about it. But the thing is keeping the status quo requires some courage and conviction. And we have seen that, the CEO turnover is high in a lot of organizations. Executive turnover is high. Some companies we work with, their leaders have changed. They moved on to other companies. So it requires both immense courage and conviction and some stability to keep this going.
And I was also surprised to realize a bias is actually at play here, where leaders only want to focus on the here and now, and they're almost not incapable, but it's very, very much an uphill battle to help them think way into the future. Because if it's in front of us now, that's the most important problem. Can you dig into that a little bit?
Yeah, and it is, it's not just short-term, long-term, immediate problem, but if you look at our education of these company leaders for the last couple of decades, we have taught them for a long time that people are just another cost to be minimized, right? Labor costs are just another cost to be minimized. Market pays the right pay. Lean and mean is what drives efficiency. So getting them out of that mindset requires a lot of work and a lot of effort. They need to unlearn some of the things that they might have learned at business schools. So that's part of it. And then, of course, here and now, sometimes we work with companies who have immediate cash flow problems, right? Sometimes there are companies whose CEOs are wondering, am I going to be able to hold on to my job for a long time? So these are all real problems that leaders face in organizations, and they need to address the short term as well as the long term. A lot of leaders, unless you are a founder and you have been at the job for a long time and investors have you have incredible credibility with your investors, you have to either, demonstrate something in the short term or have a very strong reason and explanation for why you're making certain investments and how you expect them to pay off and why your performance is not yet good, but it will be better.
Yeah, and obviously there are a lot of examples where the cash flow thing, that's a huge concern because they're like, if we're going to double everyone's pay, we're not going to be profitable. Even if we go through your, cool system at all, we don't have the money to do that. Now, obviously you address that in the book, you're very clear, but one of the main I guess when you increase pay to employees, you put in the good job system into the organization. One of the things that actually pays people back significantly is reduction in turnover, because that results in some other fun things. Can you explain that?
Yes. And I will say one step ahead, Justin, before even reduction of turnover, because when you increase pay, that alone may not reduce turnover. And
Right.
even if it does reduce turnover, it might not happen overnight. But when we work with companies, we look at not just the pay, but the work that people do. And one of the first things that we look at is, especially large companies that have been around for a long time, what are you asking your team to do? And oftentimes what we find is that there's a lot of work that is not value added to the customers. There has been a lot of complexity that creeped up over time. So subtracting from the workload, subtracting from so much variability that happens in the front lines provides an opportunity for companies to invest in pay. And now you need, fewer hours of labor. So that is an immediate helper for pay raises. And then people's work is better. And when their work is better, less tedious, they feel like they can make a bigger impact on being able to help the customer and do their job well. They're more satisfied at their work, right? So the combination of both better pay, better schedules, and better work together reduces turnover. And turnover is a very important problem at large organizations. There's the direct cost of employee turnover, which surprisingly so few organizations have quantified. And those direct costs are, I'm obviously sure members will be all over this, but the direct costs are, the recruiting, hiring, onboarding, training, and time to full productivity. And we have seen in frontline settings, those costs can range anywhere from 10% of payroll to 25% of payroll. In one organization, we've seen it as high as 40% of payroll, but that was an outlier at a call center. So that's a direct cost of employee turnover. But then there are the indirect costs of turnover, which are much bigger than the direct costs. Those are operational problems that increase costs. In retail stores or restaurants, it could be product cost.
Mm.
The problems that reduce productivity and the problems that reduce sales. In fact, low sales in so many settings we see is the highest cost that result from high employee turnover and an underinvested workforce.
That's crazy. So, like, and this is interesting to me. If leaders aren't churning, if their stomachs aren't churning over hearing you say the turnover numbers, they should be. Would you say it's the majority of organizations that have no idea how much they're spending due to turnover cost?
So we have worked with more than 30 companies, and maybe a couple have estimated the cost of turnover before. It might be that
Jeez.
our sample is not a great sample, so I'm hesitant to make a generalization
Right.
to others, but oftentimes many companies have not quantified the direct cost of employee turnover.
That's kind of shocking that they don't know. You touched on something significant, and you started to talk about the results of having a more satisfied workplace when you're very, very focused on the customer and the employee. When you get out of your own silos as leaders and you focus on the customer employee, you started going through the benefits. I think like maybe a good story to kind of wrap this up would be the Aetna employees. They actually started solving problems on their own because of the good job system and because they were being treated so well.
Yeah, when Mark Bertoloni was the CEO of Aetna, the frontline employees, they suggested that they could solve some of their customers' problems on the spot instead of having their customers. And these are usually patients who are in a pharmacy. They want the medication. There's something wrong in the pharmacy, and they call the call center for help. And the call center reps wanted to solve these problems immediately, and they weren't allowed at first. But when Mark Bertoloni found out about the frontline employees wanting to do this, they had already invested in pay. They had already invested in other wellness programs. And he thought, we could run an experiment and to see what happens if we empower our front lines to solve customer problems. They ran this experiment. It was a huge success. Who would have known that
Mm.
frontline employees would be able to use their judgment, and they put their heads together. They figured out how to do certain things, and it ended up improving both the customer experience and the
Wow.
bottom line for Aetna. And that's not a rare example at all. What I will say at the end, though, is that when you look at people like Mark Bertoloni or some other leaders that I mentioned in the book, they have a different mental model than many other leaders that I have met. And I'll mention Jim Sinegal, the co-founder of Costco, or Isadore Sharp, the founder of Four Seasons Hotels. They have a different mental model, and that mental model starts with the customers, right? They're obsessed about creating value for the customer. And since these are frontline businesses where, it's the frontline employees that meet the customer, in their mind, you can't be customer focused if you're not frontline focused. So for
Mm.
them, it's obvious that you would empower your employees to solve customer problems. But of course, you can't empower them if you operate with high turnover and you don't trust your people. So for them, that system is an obvious system. But one reason that they are exceptions is because they have a different mental model.
And that's what I wanted to end this on was what you just brought up, which is when you say the good jobs system, and when you say things like you can't just pay people more, that's not good enough. I know a lot of leaders are like, okay, Zeynep, we would love to get you here. We would love to work on this model, but this is Tomorrowist after all. So what are the things I can do tomorrow, like right now? Assuming someone's a caring leader, they've got all the right juice, the right resources, whatever. What is that one thing, that one mental model they can focus on right now? Is that simply focus on customer, obsess on customer, and go to the front lines and seeing if you're serving them? Is it really that simple?
Yeah, focus on the customer. Go to the front lines and ask your employees, what are your customers and your biggest frustrations? Start there, right? And it's with the work that happens in the front line. So what are your customers' biggest frustrations? What are your biggest frustrations? And what can we take out from your plate that will help you serve the customer better? And how can we improve your lives too?
It's always shocking to me when leaders are so tuned out from the frontline customers and even their employees. They have absolutely no idea what's going on. So that is a perfect leave behind, is get some knowledge. And it takes time. It takes a lot of work. And it feels like a waste of time just interviewing people and going to the front lines. But that's the only way that people are going to get over this and make more good jobs. Zeynep Ton, MIT professor and co-founder of the Good Jobs Institute. And I think the book is The Case for Good Jobs. What's your website so people can reach out to you if they have any questions?
I have my book right here. ZeynepTon.com.
ZeynepTon.com. Thank you so much, Zeynep, for being on Tomorrowist.
Thank you so much for having me.
Before we say goodbye, I encourage you to subscribe to Tomorrowist wherever you get your podcasts. You can find all our episodes at shrm.org/Tomorrowist, and while you're there, sign up for our weekly newsletter. Thanks for listening, and remember, the workplace is changing rapidly. You don't have time to be a futurist. Be a Tomorrowist.